I didn't find out something was wrong because someone warned me. I found out because something I had owned for 20 years suddenly stopped responding to me. No error message, no explanation, just silence. It happened on a Tuesday morning, in an office that smelled like disinfectant and old paper. I was there to sign a routine insurance update. Nothing urgent, nothing controversial. The kind of appointment you forget 5 minutes after leaving the building. I had done this before. More than once. The clerk took my documents, typed my name, and nodded automatically. Her fingers moved fast across the keyboard, confident, practiced. Then they stopped. She stared at the screen. Typed again. Her posture changed. Not visibly enough for anyone else to notice, but I noticed. When you've lived long enough, you learn to read pauses better than words. "One moment, please," she said. She stood up and took my folder with her. That's when I understood something had already happened somewhere else. Not here. Not today. Earlier. Behind doors I didn't know existed. I waited. People came and went. A woman argued about coverage. A man complained about paperwork. Life moved forward like nothing had shifted. But my name was no longer moving with it. The clerk returned with another woman. Older, better dressed. The kind of person who never sits at the front desk. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "There appears to be a temporary hold," she said. "On what?" I asked. "On certain authorizations." "Which authorizations?" She smiled, professionally. "We don't have that information at this level." That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else she said. Not "there is no problem." Not "this is a mistake." Just, "We don't have that information at this level." I left the building with my papers still unsigned. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed. A notification from my bank. "Access restricted. Please contact support." I stared at the screen, waiting for the message to correct itself. It didn't. At home, I logged in from my computer. Same result. I tried a different browser. Same result. I called the number on the back of my card. After 20 minutes on hold, a calm voice told me there had been a risk-based limitation. Risk-based? I asked what risk. "I'm not authorized to discuss the details, sir." Authorized by whom? There was a pause. A trained one. By the system. That was the first time the word system was used without irony. By the afternoon, I had 3 emails. One from my insurance provider, informing me of a temporary review. One from a financial service I rarely used, notifying me of restricted activity. And one from my primary care network, confirming the cancellation of a routine appointment I hadn't canceled. No explanation, no accusations, just adjustments. That evening, my daughter didn't answer my call. She texted instead. "Everything okay?" I replied yes. She didn't respond. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by documents that suddenly felt like artifacts from another life, proof of identity that no longer carried weight. Nothing had been taken from me directly. No police, no court order, no letter, just quiet changes that made everything slightly harder to reach. That night, I searched my own name online. For the first time, results came back incomplete. Pages that had always been there now showed errors. Public records required additional verification. I didn't sleep, because somewhere between the municipal window and my kitchen table, I realized something far worse than losing access. Someone had decided I needed to be managed, and I hadn't been invited to the conversation. The next morning, I tried to do something ordinary on purpose. I went to the pharmacy. Not because I urgently needed anything. Because routine is a test. When something is wrong, routine is where the cracks show first. I picked up a small item, stood in line, and placed it on the counter. The cashier scanned it, smiled, and asked for my loyalty card. I gave it to her. She scanned it once, then again. Her smile tightened, just slightly. "That's strange," she said. One moment. There it was again. She turned the screen away from me. I caught a glimpse of red text. Not an error, something longer. Paragraph length. "I'll need to see your ID." That had never happened before. I handed it over. She didn't accuse me of anything. She didn't look alarmed. But she didn't give my card back either. "There's a flag on your profile," she said. "A flag?" I asked what kind. "I don't have access to the details. It just says secondary verification required." "Secondary for what?" She hesitated. "For safety." That word again. The one people use when they don't want to say control. She returned my ID and completed the transaction manually. Slower than usual. Careful, like she was following instructions written by someone else. When I left the pharmacy, I stood outside longer than necessary, watching people pass me. No one looked at me differently. No one stepped away. No sirens. But I felt it. I was slightly off grid now. Not erased. Filtered. At home, I checked my email again. There was a new message, marked important. Subject: Care Coordination Notice. That phrase stopped me. I opened it. The email was polite, almost warm. It informed me that, due to recent cross-agency data alignment, my file had been routed to a care coordination pathway. This was described as a proactive measure designed to ensure continuity, safety, and appropriate support. Support. There was no accusation, no diagnosis, just language so soft it felt padded. At the bottom, a sentence stood out. "No immediate action is required on your part at this time." That's when I knew action had already been taken. I scrolled further. There was a contact number. Not customer service, not emergency, a case liaison. I didn't call. Instead, I opened a drawer where I kept old paperwork, bank statements, insurance forms, letters from years ago. I needed to understand what version of me the system was seeing. Because it clearly wasn't the man sitting at the kitchen table. Midday, there was a knock on the door. Not hard, not urgent, measured. When I opened it, a woman stood on my porch holding a tablet. Late 40s, neutral clothes, no visible badge. "Good afternoon," she said. "I'm here for a wellness check." Those words landed heavier than anything else so far. I asked who sent her. She smiled, the way people do when they've answered this question many times before. "We work with multiple agencies," she said. "It's routine." Routine. She glanced past me, just briefly, like she was already mapping my living room. "I don't remember requesting a visit," I said. "You didn't," she replied. "This was system generated." There it was again. The system. She didn't step forward. She didn't force her way in. She just waited, patient, confident that time was on her side. "I only need a few minutes," she added. "Just to confirm a few things." "Confirm what?" "That you're safe," she said. "And that others are safe around you." The sentence was calm, neutral, but it split the air between us cleanly. Because for the first time, the implication was no longer abstract. Somewhere, someone had described me as a potential risk, and now that description was moving through the world faster than I could follow. I stepped aside and let her in. Not because I wanted to, but because I already understood the rule I hadn't been told yet. Refusal would be recorded. She sat at my kitchen table like someone who had every right to be there. Not relaxed, not tense, positioned. The tablet stayed on her lap, screen dark. She didn't turn it on right away. That was deliberate. People speak more freely when they think nothing is being recorded. "Before we start," she said, "I want to reassure you, this isn't an investigation." I nodded. People who say that are always lying. Sometimes gently, sometimes legally. She asked simple questions first. Name, date of birth, emergency contact. I answered all of them. There was no reason not to. Then she tilted her head slightly. "Do you live alone?" "Yes." "Any regular visitors?" "No." She paused, fingers resting on the tablet now. "That's a recent change, isn't it?" I looked at her. "No." She smiled politely. "Our records indicate otherwise." There it was. Not an argument. A correction. "Who are your records?" I asked. She didn't answer directly. Sometimes people forget changes they didn't notice happening. I let that sit. She asked about my sleep, my diet, whether I ever felt confused, overwhelmed, or angry without knowing why. Each question by itself was harmless. Together, they formed a shape, a profile. And how would you describe your relationship with authority? She asked. That one was too clean. I don't think about it, I said. She typed something. Do you feel misunderstood by institutions? She followed. I hesitated. That hesitation was the mistake. She noticed immediately. Take your time, she said gently. There are no wrong answers. That was another lie. I chose my words carefully after that. Neutral, balanced, boring. But neutrality, I was learning, can look like avoidance. At one point she asked, have you ever felt that systems were working against you personally? I almost laughed. Instead, I said, no. She typed longer this time. After 20 minutes, she stood. Thank you for your cooperation, she said. This helps ensure everything proceeds smoothly. Proceeds where? She didn't say. At the door, she turned back. You may be contacted again. Possibly by another department. Another department. As if I were luggage changing conveyors. When she left, the house felt different. Not violated. Documented. I sat down and replayed the conversation in my head, sentence by sentence. That's when I realized something that made my stomach tighten. She hadn't asked a single question whose answer mattered. Only how I answered mattered. Tone, timing, hesitation. I wasn't being evaluated for truth. I was being evaluated for compliance. That afternoon, I logged into my online banking. My account was still there. Balance unchanged, but a banner sat at the top of the screen. Temporary review in progress. Some features may be limited. Limited how? I clicked for details. The page refreshed, then logged me out. When I tried again, it asked for additional verification. Security questions I had answered years ago. One of them caught me off guard. Who was your secondary emergency contact in 2018? I didn't have one in 2018. I guessed. Wrong. The system locked me out for 24 hours. That night, I searched my name online. Not social media, databases, public filings, mentions. Most of it was normal. Until I found a document I had never seen before. A regional coordination report, redacted heavily, but my initials appeared twice, next to a phrase that made my chest go cold. Escalation pathway. Observation to intervention. I closed the laptop. I understood now. This wasn't about something I had done. It was about something I might do. And the system didn't intend to wait and find out. The first refusal came wrapped in courtesy. I felt it before I understood it. The next morning, I went to renew my parking permit. Same office as always. Same counter. Same faded notice about office hours taped crookedly to the glass. The clerk scanned my ID. Paused. Typed. Paused again. Her smile stayed in place, but something behind it tightened. I'm sorry, she said, lowering her voice. There seems to be a temporary hold. On a parking permit? I asked. She nodded, as if that explained everything. It's procedural. You'll need clearance before we can proceed. Clearance from who? She glanced to her left. Not at a supervisor. At a camera. I'm not authorized to say. That was new. I stepped aside to let the next person through. A man in his 30s, impatient, tapping his phone against the counter. He got his permit in under 2 minutes. I stood there, holding my ID, feeling suddenly sorted. Outside, I checked my email. Nothing. No notices. No warnings. No explanations. Just silence. Silence, I was learning, was how systems spoke when they didn't want a response. I decided to visit Martin. Martin and I had worked together for years before I retired. He stayed on. Middle management. The kind of man who knew where the forms lived and which doors opened if you knocked at the right time. If anyone could tell me what was happening, it was him. He didn't invite me in. That alone told me everything. We stood in his doorway, the chain still on. His wife's voice drifted faintly from inside, then stopped when she realized I was there. Is everything all right? I asked. Yes, he said too quickly. Of course. I waited. He didn't meet my eyes. Martin, I said quietly, has something been filed under my name? His jaw tightened. I really shouldn't discuss internal processes, he said. That was not an answer. Are you afraid to? I asked. That one landed. He looked up then, just for a second. Long enough for me to see it. Not anger. Not suspicion. Caution. I don't think you're dangerous, he said carefully. The word hung between us. Dangerous. I didn't say anything about danger, I replied. He swallowed. I know. There it was again. Corrections instead of explanations. I can tell you this, he continued, lowering his voice. Once a file gets a certain kind of tag, everything that touches it slows down. People become careful. About what? About being associated with the wrong outcome. I leaned closer. What outcome? He shook his head. I can't help you. Not won't. Can't. I stepped back. Martin, I said, have you read my file? No, he said immediately. Then, after a pause, not all of it. I thanked him and left. As I walked home, I noticed something else. People I knew nodded more quickly now. Conversations ended faster. Doors closed a little sooner than they used to. Not hostility. Distance. As if proximity itself carried risk. That afternoon, a letter arrived. No logo. No letterhead. Just my name and address printed cleanly. Inside was a single page. Notice of advisory monitoring. No accusations. No charges. Just a paragraph explaining that, based on cumulative indicators, certain interactions may be reviewed to ensure continuity of public safety and individual well-being. I read it twice, then a third time. It didn't say I had done anything wrong. It said I might, and that was enough. At the bottom was a phone number. Not mandatory, it said, but strongly recommended. I didn't call. Instead, I sat at my table and did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote everything down. Dates, conversations, names, exact phrases, because suddenly, memory felt unreliable, and I had the unsettling sense that soon, my version of events would no longer be the one that mattered. They didn't come with force. That's what surprised me most. They came with options. The call happened 3 days after the letter. Unknown number. No urgency in the ring. No repeated attempts. Just once. I answered. Good afternoon, a man said. Calm voice. Measured. Professional. My name is Daniel. I'm calling regarding the advisory notice you received. I didn't respond, I said. That's fine, he replied. This call isn't compulsory. Of course it wasn't. Nothing ever was. I'd like to clarify a few things, he continued. There seems to be some concern that you may be experiencing elevated stress. I almost laughed. Is stress illegal now? I asked. No, Daniel said, but unaddressed stress can lead to outcomes that are regrettable for everyone involved. There it was. Everyone. Not me. Not them. Everyone. I live alone, I said. I pay my bills. I haven't had so much as a parking ticket in 20 years. Yes, he agreed. Your record is very clean. That's actually part of why early intervention is recommended. I closed my eyes. So what do you want? A conversation, he said. In person, preferably. Informal. Just to establish baseline clarity. Where? A neutral location. A community office. Coffee will be available. Coffee. As if caffeine made consent easier. And if I decline? I asked. There was a pause. Not long. Just enough to feel deliberate. Then the file remains open, he said. Which increases administrative friction. I pictured the parking permit. The clerk. Martin's door. Define friction, I said. Delays. Secondary reviews. Occasional misunderstandings. I exhaled slowly. You understand how this sounds, I said. Yes, Daniel replied. And I want to be very clear. No one is accusing you of anything. Yet, I said. Yet, he agreed, without hesitation. That honesty was almost refreshing. I agreed to the meeting. Not because I trusted them. Because I wanted to see how far the soft pressure went before it hardened. The office was exactly what he'd described. Bright, neutral colors. Posters about wellness and resilience. A coffee machine humming quietly in the corner. Daniel was younger than I expected. Late 30s. Clean suit. No badge visible. He shook my hand. Thank you for coming voluntarily, he said. I noticed the word. Voluntarily. We sat. He asked about my routine. Sleep, diet, social contact. I answered carefully. Precisely. He nodded often. Took notes. At one point, he said, "Have you noticed people reacting differently to you lately?" "Yes," I said. "Because you told them to." He smiled gently. "No, because perception shifts when context changes." "That's not an answer," I said. "It's the only one I'm allowed to give." After an hour, he closed his notebook. "There are two paths forward," he said. Of course there were. One, he continued, "you agree to a short-term evaluation. No confinement, no diagnosis, just observation. It would resolve the file quickly. And the second, you decline," he said. "And the system continues to monitor passively." "What does passive monitoring look like?" He hesitated. "Fewer assumptions in your favor." I stood. "I'm not sick," I said. "I'm not dangerous, and I won't consent to be treated as if I am." Daniel nodded, as if he'd expected that. "I respect your decision," he said. "But understand this. Refusal doesn't stop a process. It just removes your voice from it." That was the moment I understood. Consent wasn't about permission. It was about cooperation. And without it, the machine didn't stop. It simply moved around you. I left knowing one thing with absolute clarity. From now on, every normal action would be reinterpreted. And every attempt to live quietly would be framed as resistance. The knock came 2 mornings later. Not loud, not urgent, 2 firm taps. Polite enough to be ignored, deliberate enough to be remembered. I was still in my robe. Coffee untouched on the table. The day hadn't decided what it was going to be yet. I looked through the peephole. My sister, Elaine, stood in the hallway holding a paper bag and wearing the kind of concerned expression people practice in mirrors. Soft eyes, tight mouth, concern without panic, care without urgency. Behind her, half a step back, stood a man I didn't recognize. Late 40s, casual jacket, clipboard held loosely at his side like it wasn't important. "Hey," Elaine said when I opened the door. I was in the area. Of course she was. "You didn't call," I said. "I know," she replied quickly. "I thought it would be nicer to surprise you." That word again. Surprise. The man smiled faintly. Didn't introduce himself. "I brought soup," Elaine said, lifting the bag slightly. "You always forget to eat when you're stressed." I hadn't told her about the letter, or the call, or the meeting. Yet here she was. "I'm fine," I said. "I know," she said immediately. "Too fast. I keep telling them that." "Them." The man shifted his weight. "I'm sorry," I said, looking past her. "And you are?" "Oh, this is Mark," Elaine said. "He's just here to help me understand some paperwork." Mark nodded. Still didn't offer his hand. "Mind if we come in?" Elaine asked. "Just for a minute." I hesitated. Not because I was afraid. Because I knew that once they crossed the threshold, the story changed. "No," I said. "I don't." Elaine's face fell, but only slightly. Controlled disappointment. "I thought you might say that," she said softly. "That's actually why Mark is here." There it was. "Your name's been mentioned," Mark said calmly. "In a family context. Nothing formal. Just concerns." "Concerns about what?" I asked. Elaine stepped in before he could answer. "About you being alone," she said. "About how isolated you've become. About how defensive you sound lately." "I'm defensive because people keep showing up unannounced," I said. She winced, as if that hurt her. "See," she said to Mark. "That tone. It's not aggressive, but it's sharp." Mark scribbled something on his clipboard. I felt something settle in my chest. Cold, heavy. "You reported me," I said, looking directly at her. Elaine's eyes widened. "No," she said. "I asked for advice." "That's the same thing," I replied. "It's not," she insisted. "I didn't file anything. I just told them I was worried." "About what, exactly?" She hesitated, then said, "You've changed." There it was, the most dangerous accusation of all. "How?" I asked. "You don't answer calls right away. You question things. You get tense when people try to help." Mark nodded again. Those behaviors, he said, can sometimes indicate heightened vigilance. Or intelligence, I said. He smiled thinly. We don't diagnose here. But you document, I said. Yes, he admitted. Elaine reached out, touching my arm. I'm doing this for you, she whispered. If you just cooperate a little, they'll back off. I looked at her hand on my sleeve. My sister, the person who had shared my childhood bedroom, who had borrowed money from me twice and never paid it back, who had always needed someone else to manage consequences. You didn't come for soup, I said quietly. She didn't deny it. Mark closed his clipboard. We'll be in touch, he said. No action required from you at this time. That phrase again. At this time. They left. The hallway felt louder after the door closed, like the building itself had been listening. I stood there for a long moment. Then I did something I hadn't done yet. I opened the letter again. And for the first time, I noticed the reference code at the bottom. I wrote it down, because if they were keeping records, so was I. The bank didn't call to warn me. It called to apologize. That alone should have told me something was wrong. Mr. She paused before saying my last name. Not long, just long enough. Yes, I said. There appears to be a temporary restriction on one of your accounts. Which one? Your primary checking. I waited. For what reason? I asked. Another pause. I'm not authorized to see the note, she said carefully. Only that it's procedural. Procedural how? She lowered her voice, even though this was a recorded line. It usually resolves itself. That was the third time I'd heard that phrase in less than a week. I need to pay my utilities today, I said. And my insurance. I understand, she replied. You're not frozen. Just limited. Define limited. Large transfers. New payees. Certain online actions. I pictured the reference code I'd written down. The clipboard. Mark's neutral smile. Can I speak to someone who is authorized? I asked. She hesitated. I can request a review. How long? 3 to 5 business days. And if I don't request it? Another soft answer. Then nothing changes. I thanked her. Hung up. Then I logged in myself. The dashboard looked normal at first glance. Balances. History. No red warnings. But when I tried to add a new payee, denied. When I tried to move money between my own accounts, pending review. Not frozen. Restricted. The clever part. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. This wasn't a mistake. Mistakes are loud. They trigger emails, alerts, apologies with explanations. This was quiet, designed to make me doubt myself before I accused anyone else. I pulled out the folder I'd started using, plain manila, nothing dramatic. Inside were copies, the letter from the registry, the appointment notice, the reference code, and now, the bank screenshots. I added dates, times, names, because if this was nothing, documentation wouldn't matter, and if it wasn't, it would matter more than anything. The doorbell rang that afternoon. Not Elaine this time. A delivery. Certified. I signed, closed the door, opened the envelope standing up. It wasn't from the bank. It wasn't from the city. It was from an independent review service. Neutral logo, neutral font, neutral language. You have been identified as a participant in a routine assessment related to administrative continuity. Administrative continuity. I read it twice, then a third time. No accusations, no threats, just an invitation. Voluntary, non-adversarial, recommended for your protection. At the bottom was a suggested date. Tomorrow. I sat down slowly. This was no longer Elaine worrying, or Mark documenting. This was infrastructure, and infrastructure doesn't move unless someone pushes it. I picked up my phone. Not to call Elaine, not the bank. I called an old colleague. Retired now, used to work in compliance oversight before the term got softened. He answered on the third ring. I need to ask you something, I said. Off the record. There was a pause on the other end. Then, are you already in it, or do you think you are? That question told me everything. Already, I said. Then listen carefully, he replied. Do not miss that assessment. But don't walk in blind. The line went quiet for a second. They don't need you unstable, he continued. They need you cooperative. The moment you resist openly, the language changes. To what? To safety, he said. I closed my eyes. Bring records, he added. Bring calm. And whatever you do, don't go alone. The call ended. I looked at the envelope again. Tomorrow. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood something important. This system doesn't lock doors. It narrows hallways until there's only one direction left. The building wasn't labeled the way I expected. No department, no clinic, no office of anything. Just a name on frosted glass that sounded like a consulting firm you'd forget 5 minutes after leaving. Neutral colors, soft lighting, chairs arranged to face each other, not a desk. No visible security, no cameras I could see. That was deliberate. A woman met me in the lobby. Mid-40s, calm posture, voice trained to lower itself when you raise yours. Thank you for coming, she said, smiling just enough to be reassuring. We appreciate cooperation. Cooperation, not attendance, not participation. She gestured toward a small conference room. I noticed there were no pens on the table. No papers, just a tablet, face down. We'll just have a conversation, she said. There are no right or wrong answers. That was the first lie. She didn't introduce herself as a doctor, or a therapist, or an evaluator, just a facilitator. We're here to understand how you're managing recent changes, she continued. Nothing more. I nodded. Calm, neutral. She flipped the tablet over. Let's start simple, she said. Do you feel supported by your family? Yes, I answered. She tapped the screen. And when they express concern, how does that make you feel? Grateful. Tap. Do you ever feel misunderstood? Everyone does. Yes, I said carefully. Tap. Do you believe systems sometimes fail people? I paused. That's a broad question, I replied. She smiled. It can be. I realized then what the structure was. Every question had a safe answer. And a true answer. The safe answer kept the process smooth. The true answer created friction. And friction is what they measure. Do you think recent restrictions placed on you are unfair? She asked. That one was bait. I leaned back slightly. Changed posture. I think processes are complex, I said. I assume they exist for a reason. Tap. She nodded approvingly. You seem very self-aware. That was not a compliment. Some people react emotionally when they feel control slipping, she added lightly. That doesn't appear to be the case with you. I didn't respond. She moved on. Have you made any unusual financial decisions lately? No. Tap. Any impulsive actions? No. Tap. Any thoughts about acting against people who frustrate you? No. Tap. Then she stopped typing, looked at me. Not with suspicion, but with curiosity. May I ask something slightly more personal? I waited. When someone questions your judgment, she said, do you feel the need to prove them wrong? That one almost got me. Because the honest answer was yes. Instead, I said, I prefer clarity. Tap. She set the tablet down. That's all for today, she said warmly. This will help ensure continuity. Continuity again. As I stood to leave, she added one final sentence, almost as an afterthought. Oh, and for the record, this isn't about capacity. I stopped, turned back. It isn't? I asked. She smiled. It's about risk. I left without another word. Outside, the air felt heavier than when I'd arrived. Not because anything had happened, but because something had been logged. They hadn't judged me. They'd categorized me. And categories don't argue back. On the walk home, my phone buzzed. A message from the bank. Your account review is ongoing. Thank you for your patience. Patience. I went home, opened my folder, and added a new page. Assessment completed. Date, time, location, facilitator name. Then I wrote a line underneath it. Questions are not asked to learn answers. They are asked to confirm alignment. Only after writing that did something else click into place. The facilitator hadn't been alone. The tablet had been connected. And somewhere, quiet, distant, and invisible, Someone else had been listening. The first refusal came quietly. No letter, no warning, no explanation that could be argued with. I discovered it standing in line at my own bank. Same branch, same counter, same woman who had verified my signature for years without hesitation. She scanned my card, paused, scanned it again. Then she looked up, not alarmed, not apologetic, just careful. "I'm sorry," she said, lowering her voice. "I can't complete this transaction today." I frowned slightly. "Why?" She turned the monitor just enough that I could see a single line of text. "Account under review, limited operations." "That doesn't answer my question," I said calmly. She nodded. "I know. It's all the system gives me. I wasn't withdrawing a large amount. I wasn't doing anything unusual. I was paying a utility bill. Can you tell me who initiated the review?" I asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't have access to that information." Of course she didn't. "Can I speak to a supervisor?" She pressed a button under the desk. While we waited, I noticed something new. The people behind me were watching. Not with curiosity, with relief. Relief that it wasn't happening to them. The supervisor arrived, younger, better dressed, less human. "I understand there's some confusion," he said. "No," I replied. "There's an obstruction." He smiled faintly. "The review is procedural," he said. "Temporary." "How temporary?" "That depends." "On what?" He folded his hands. "Compliance." There it was again. "Compliance with what?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. "In situations like this," he said, "we encourage clients to rely on authorized representatives." I felt my jaw tighten. "I don't have one." "Yes," he said gently. "We're aware." "Aware. So what are my options?" I asked. He leaned in slightly, as if sharing advice. "You can wait," he said. "You can submit supporting documentation. Or you can appoint someone to assist you." "Assist? I'm capable of handling my own finances," I said. He nodded. "That's not in dispute." That was when I understood. Capability wasn't the issue. Control was. I left the bank without paying the bill. At home, the voicemail light was blinking. One message. From my sister. "Hey," she said. "The bank called me. They said you might need help. Don't get upset. This is just to make things easier." Easier for who? I didn't call her back. Instead, I sat at my desk and opened my folder again. Bank. Limited access. No written notice. Verbal confirmation only. Then I wrote another line beneath it. Denial without explanation is the most effective form of pressure. That afternoon, I tried something small. I logged into an online service I'd used for years. Same password. Same device. Access temporarily suspended. I tried another. Same message. Different wording. Same outcome. By evening, I had a list. Bank. Insurance portal. Utility account. One medical provider. Not locked. Restricted. Like doors that still exist but no longer open for you. My phone rang just after sunset. Unknown number. I answered. "This is a courtesy check-in," a voice said. Professional. Neutral. "We noticed some service disruptions today." "I noticed them too," I replied. "We want to reassure you," the voice continued, "that these measures are preventative, not punitive." Preventing what? I asked. A pause. Risk escalation. There it is again, I said. That word. Yes, the voice replied. It's important. To whom? To everyone involved, including me? Another pause. Especially you. I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down. I didn't shout. I sat very still, because this was the moment I'd been waiting for. Not the accusation. Not the intervention. The restriction. This was the phase where people panic. Where they sign things just to make the walls stop moving. I wasn't going to do that. Instead, I did something else. I slowed down. I stopped making calls. Stopped reacting. Stopped asking for explanations that would never be given. I reviewed what I still controlled. My physical presence. My records. My timeline. They wanted urgency. I gave them patience. That night, I wrote one more line in my notebook. When the system tightens, stillness becomes resistance. And for the first time since this began, I felt something shift. Not relief, not safety, clarity. They weren't trying to take everything at once. They were testing how little pressure it would take for me to hand it over myself. I turned off the light and went to bed knowing one thing with absolute certainty. Tomorrow, they would escalate. And I needed to be ready before they did. The document arrived the next morning. Not by mail, by email, text message, and a printed copy slid under my door sometime between midnight and dawn. No envelope, no letterhead that felt personal. Just a title centered at the top of the page, bold and calm, like it had nothing to hide. Notice of support review, voluntary cooperation request. Voluntary. That word does a lot of work when it's placed early. I read it standing in my kitchen. Coffee untouched. The room quiet enough that I could hear the refrigerator cycle on and off. The notice didn't accuse me of anything. It praised me. It thanked me for my long record of independence. It acknowledged my history of responsible decision-making. It assured me this was not a finding of incapacity. Then it introduced the problem. Recent third-party concerns, it said, have created a duty to ensure continuity of care, financial stability, and personal safety. Concerns. No names, no dates, no incidents, just concerns. I turned the page. Recommended action. Appointment of a temporary support liaison. Not a guardian, not a conservator, a liaison. Someone who could assist with navigation, coordinate communication, and act as an intermediary where delays or misunderstandings may occur. I laughed once, quietly. They had built a cage out of soft language. At the bottom of the page was a signature line. Not mine, someone else's. Proposed liaison. My sister. I set the paper down carefully. Not because my hands were shaking. Because I didn't want to tear it. The phone rang less than a minute later. Her name appeared on the screen like a punchline. I answered. Before you say anything, she said quickly, I didn't ask for this. They came to me. They always do, I replied. She sighed. They're worried about you. Who is they? I asked. A case coordinator. Someone from the county. They said it's routine. Routine, I repeated. Yes, especially at your age. There it was. Not incompetence. Age. They just want someone listed, she continued. It doesn't change anything. It actually unlocks things. Your bank access. Your accounts. So the restrictions are leverage, I said. No, she said too fast. They're safeguards. For what? I asked. For mistakes, she said. For misunderstandings. For resistance, I finished. She didn't answer. They said if you don't cooperate, she added softly, it could get more formal. Define formal. Another pause. Evaluations, she said. Reviews. Possibly a hearing. I closed my eyes. Not from fear. From recognition. This was the fork in the road. Sign, and everything becomes easier. Refuse, and everything becomes official. Did you read the notice? I asked. Yes. Did you notice there's no end date? She hesitated. Temporary things don't always have dates. They do when they're meant to end, I said. She tried another angle. I'm just trying to help you. I know, I replied. That's why they chose you. She went quiet. Think about it, she said finally. Please, just sign it. We can undo it later. Undo. That word does even more work than voluntary. I didn't argue. I thanked her for calling. I told her I'd review it carefully. After I hung up, I did something deliberate. I didn't respond. I didn't refuse. I didn't agree. I documented. I photographed the notice as found. Logged the timestamps of delivery. Saved the metadata from the email and text. Then I read it again. This time, not as a citizen. As a system. The pattern was clear now. No accusations. No emergency. No confrontation. Just layered inconvenience until compliance feels like relief. They weren't trying to prove I was unfit. They were trying to make independence impractical. By noon, another message arrived. Same coordinator. Different tone. We haven't received confirmation yet. Please be advised that delays may extend current service limitations. I smiled. They were rushing, which meant something had shifted on their end too. That afternoon, I left the house. Not to fight, to observe. I went to places I'd been blocked before. The bank, the municipal office, a medical billing desk. I asked the same question at each one. Who has authority over this restriction? Every answer was the same. It's already been flagged. Flagged by whom? No one knew, or no one would say. At the last stop, a clerk leaned closer and lowered her voice. Off the record, she said, once a support review starts, it doesn't stop on its own. How does it stop? I asked. She glanced around. When someone is officially assigned. Assigned. I thanked her and left. Back home, I opened my notebook and wrote slowly, carefully. They are building a narrative where help equals access, and independence equals risk. Then I drew a line under it. Because this was the moment. The one where most people fold. I didn't. Instead, I prepared for the next move. Because now I knew exactly what was coming. Not tomorrow, not next week, but soon. An invitation, not to sign, to be assessed. And when that happens, the story changes completely. The invitation came 2 days later. Not certified, not threatening, calendar polite, support review intake, optional attendance encouraged. Time window, 3 hours. Location, Community Services Annex, Building C parking validated. They even thanked me for my ongoing cooperation, which was interesting, considering I hadn't cooperated at all. I read it once, then folded the paper and placed it in my jacket pocket. I was going, not because I agreed, because I wanted to see who showed up when I did. The building was newer than it needed to be. Clean lines, frosted glass, neutral colors meant to calm people who didn't know they were being processed yet. The waiting room was quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. No television, no magazines, just chairs arranged to prevent conversation. A woman at the front desk smiled like she'd practiced it in a mirror. Name? I gave it. She typed, paused, typed again. That pause again. Always the pause. You're early, she said. Good habit, I replied. She nodded, then slid a clipboard toward me. Consent forms. Not for treatment, for discussion. Permission to share information between agencies. Permission to document observations. Permission to retain records. I didn't take the pen. I'll review these after the meeting, I said. Her smile tightened. That's not how we usually do it. I know, I said. But it is how I do it. She glanced toward a hallway door. A signal. Please have a seat, she said. Someone will be with you shortly. I sat and waited. People passed through the room without looking at me. Staff, mostly, all moving with purpose that didn't include me. After 20 minutes, a man appeared. Mid-40s, neutral suit, no badge visible. Mister, he asked. I stood. He led me down a corridor that bent twice, just enough to make it feel private without being secluded. The room we entered was small. Round table, 3 chairs. 2 were already occupied, one by the coordinator whose messages I'd been receiving, the other by someone I hadn't expected. My sister. She stood quickly. I didn't know you were coming today, she said. I did, I replied. The coordinator gestured toward the empty chair. Please, she said, have a seat. I didn't. I'd like to know, I said calmly, whether this meeting is observational or evaluative. A flicker crossed her face. It's an intake conversation, she said. That's not an answer, I replied. The man in the suit cleared his throat. Perhaps we can begin by sitting down. I prefer clarity first, I said. The coordinator nodded slowly. This meeting is not a determination, she said. It's an opportunity. For whom? I asked. She smiled again. For everyone. I sat. Not because I accepted her framing. Because I wanted a complete record. She began with warm language. How have you been feeling lately? Any changes in sleep or appetite? Do you feel supported? I answered plainly, briefly, precisely. No elaboration. No emotion. She pivoted. We've received reports that some interactions have been tense. Define tense, I said. She glanced at my sister. My sister looked down. Concern has been expressed. The coordinator continued, about rigidity. Resistance to assistance. I nodded once. Yes, I said. I resist unauthorized interference. The man in the suit scribbled something. Have you experienced moments of confusion? The coordinator asked. No. Anger? No. Suspicion? I smiled slightly. That depends, I said. Is vigilance now considered pathology? The room shifted. The man stopped writing. The coordinator leaned back. We're not here to debate terminology, she said. I am, I replied. Because terminology is the only thing happening here. My sister spoke up then. They just want to make sure you're okay. I turned to her. I am okay, I said. What I am not is consenting. She looked pained. The coordinator tried again. If you decline voluntary cooperation, she said gently, the process may continue without your input. I nodded. Yes, I said. That's usually how pressure works. Silence. Then I reached into my jacket and placed a folder on the table. Not thick, just enough. I'm recording this interaction, I said. I've also prepared a written statement declining liaison assignment, declining information sharing, and requesting the names and credentials of all parties initiating this review. The coordinator's eyes flicked to the man in the suit. He finally spoke. That's unusual. So is restricting access without findings, I replied. I slid the folder toward them. And one more thing, I added. I've requested copies of all third-party reports triggering this review. In writing. The coordinator inhaled slowly. Those aren't always disclosed. Then they don't exist in a form that can bind me, I said. My sister looked between us. You're making this harder than it needs to be, she whispered. No, I said quietly. I'm making it accurate. The coordinator closed her notebook. This meeting will be noted, she said. Please do, I replied. And note this as well. I stood. I am not refusing care, I said. You are refusing substitution of authority. You make it visible to itself. Not fast. Thank you for listening. Not angry. Calm justice doesn't shout. In the parking lot, keeps records. My phone buzzed. An alert. Status update. Review pending. Escalation under consideration. I read it once. Then I turned the phone off. Because now the system had a choice. And systems hate choices that involve records. The response didn't come as a confrontation. It came as efficiency. 2 days after the meeting, my phone began behaving differently. Not dramatically, subtly. Calls I didn't answer didn't leave voicemails. Messages arrived without notification sounds. One email appeared already marked as read. Nothing obvious, nothing provable on its own. Just enough friction to make communication unreliable. That was the first adjustment. The second came through my landlord. He called in the afternoon, apologetic before I'd even said hello. Just a formality, he said. We received a request to confirm tenancy status. Nothing serious. From whom? I asked. He hesitated. Community services. Or an affiliated office. I wrote it down. What exactly did they ask? I said, well, he replied, whether you've had complaints, disturbances, if anyone's expressed concern. And what did you tell them? That you're quiet. Always have been. I thanked him. After the call ended, I didn't relax. Because this wasn't escalation. This was testing the perimeter. That evening, a courier arrived. Not registered. No signature required. Inside the envelope was a single-page notice. Temporary support liaison assigned. No mandate. No diagnosis. No authority stated. Just a name, a phone number, and a line that read, engagement recommended to avoid administrative delay. Administrative delay of what? They hadn't said, and that omission was intentional. The next morning, the liaison called. Her voice was calm, practiced, friendly. I'm just here to help coordinate, she said. No evaluations. No decisions. Then you won't mind answering a few questions, I replied. A pause. Of course. Who assigned you? A review committee. Which one? She named a department that didn't exist as a standalone entity, only as a subsection of another office. Under what authority? Well, she said carefully, this is a temporary placement. Temporary things still have origins, I said. Another pause. I can email you some background. Please do, I replied. Before we speak again. She agreed too quickly. That was mistake number one. The email arrived an hour later. It was long, warm, full of phrases like continuity of care, community-based observation, risk mitigation. What it did not contain: a statutory reference, a signed order, any mention of consent. Instead, it referenced existing concerns and ongoing documentation. I forwarded it to my archive. Then I replied with one sentence: please provide the initiating report and the legal basis for liaison assignment. No greeting, no sign-off, just a request. By the end of the day, 3 things happened. First, the liaison stopped responding. Second, my sister texted. They're worried you're isolating yourself, she wrote. I didn't reply. Third, I received a notice from my internet provider. Service verification required. Reason: account irregularity. I logged in. My account details had been accessed earlier that day, from a location not my own. I changed passwords, enabled 2-factor authentication, downloaded access logs. Then I printed them, because now the system wasn't just observing. It was touching infrastructure. That night, I sat at my desk and laid everything out. Not emotionally, chronologically. Dates, times, names, language patterns. What I saw was clear. They weren't trying to declare me unfit. Not yet. They were trying to make normal life inconvenient enough that compliance would feel like relief. That's how you bypass refusal. You don't break it, you surround it. The next morning, I made my first proactive move. I requested, in writing, a complete data access disclosure from every agency named so far. I cited the statute. I included deadlines. Then I sent copies to 2 oversight offices that had nothing to do with my case. Yet, oversight hates surprises, and systems hate oversight more than resistance. By noon, the liaison called again. Her voice was different, less friendly, more careful. I think there's been some misunderstanding, she said. I agree, I replied. And documentation will resolve it. She hesitated. We're just trying to prevent escalation. I smiled. Then stop creating records you can't justify. Silence. Then, quietly, you're making this very difficult. No, I said. I'm making it traceable. The line went dead. That evening, a new alert appeared. Status update. Review expanded. External consultation pending. Expanded. That was new. They hadn't closed the door. They'd opened another one. And this time, it wasn't administrative. It was clinical adjacent, which meant the next step wouldn't be subtle. It would be framed as protective. And once protection enters the language, consent becomes optional. I opened a new folder. Labeled it pre-intervention phase, because whatever came next would pretend to be concern. And concern, when recorded improperly, becomes custody. They didn't call it an evaluation. That was the first thing I noticed. The message arrived just after 9 in the morning, phrased as an update, not a request. Independent professional consultation scheduled. Purpose: clarification and support alignment. No opt-in, no opt-out, just scheduled. The appointment window was wide, 3 hours, which told me 2 things immediately. They expected compliance, not coordination. The person coming wasn't there to listen. They were there to observe. The professional arrived on time. Middle-aged, neutral clothing, no visible badge, carried a slim folder, not a laptop. That mattered. Paper means notes can be selective. Thank you for agreeing to meet, he said, already stepping inside as if permission were implied. I didn't agree, I replied. But you're here now. A small smile. Let's not start adversarially, he said. I'm not here to diagnose anything. That was mistake number 1. People who aren't diagnosing don't say so. He chose the chair nearest the window. Positioning. Backlit observers see less detail but feel less exposed. I stayed at the table. He asked about my routine. I answered plainly. He asked about my relationships. I answered briefly. He asked how I felt about recent involvement. I paused. Define involvement, I said. He tilted his head. You've had multiple points of contact from services. That can feel intrusive. Intrusive wasn't the word they'd used. Supportive, preventive, necessary. Language shifts depending on audience. He flipped open his folder. I saw headings. No checkboxes. No scales. That concerned me, because scales constrain interpretation. Open notes do not. I want to understand your reactions, he said. Some people respond with agitation when they feel misunderstood. There it was. The reframe. Not objection. Not boundary. Reaction. Symptom language dressed as empathy. I'm not agitated, I said calmly. I'm documenting. He nodded slowly. As you see it, he said. Mistake number 2. I stood and walked to my desk. Picked up a single sheet. Before we continue, I said, I need to clarify your role. He looked mildly surprised. Of course. Who requested your involvement? He gave a general answer. A coordinating body. Which one? He hesitated. Multiple stakeholders. Under what authority? Another pause. I'm not here under coercive mandate. That wasn't my question, I replied. Silence stretched. This wasn't confrontation. It was audit. I placed the sheet in front of him. A printed email chain. His name appeared on it. Dated 2 days earlier. Subject line. Behavioral resistance indicators. His eyes flicked once. Just once. Enough. That document predates your visit, I said. Which means conclusions were drawn before observation. He closed the folder. That email doesn't represent my personal assessment. No, I said. It represents your function. He leaned back. You're very focused on process, he said. That can sometimes mask. I interrupted. Stop. The word landed flat. Not loud. Not emotional. Just final. This conversation is no longer informal, I said. You're either acting as an independent consultant or as an extension of a file. Which is it? He exhaled. That depends on cooperation. Mistake number 3. I sat back down. Then let me be clear, I said. I do not consent to observational inference without disclosed criteria. I do not consent to third-party summaries. And I do not consent to characterization of refusal as impairment. He stared at me. This wasn't going how his notes expected. You're making this difficult, he said quietly. There it is again, I replied. Difficulty. I slid another document across the table. A formal notice. Advanced declaration of capacity. Witnessed. Dated. Legally binding unless overturned by court order. I filed this morning, I said. Along with notice of representation. His jaw tightened. You're anticipating escalation, he said. No, I answered. I'm preventing misinterpretation. He stood. I'll have to report that you were uncooperative, he said. I looked up at him. Be precise, I said. Say I was procedurally compliant and substantively resistant. He frowned. That's not standard phrasing. It's accurate, I replied. And accuracy matters when records start moving faster than people. He left without shaking my hand. An hour later, the update came. Consultation completed. Recommendation. Continued monitoring. Monitoring, not action. Which meant 2 things. They hadn't won, but they hadn't stopped. They'd shifted strategies. From pressure to patience. And patience, inside systems, is never neutral. That evening, I received a message from an unknown number. Just one line. You're being very careful. That's good. But careful people still miss things. No signature. No follow-up. I saved it. Because when systems feel observed, they outsource intimidation. I added a new divider to the folder. Reframing phase. This was no longer about me. It was about how my resistance was being rewritten. And the next step wouldn't involve meetings. It would involve records appearing where I'd never been. The report appeared 3 days later. Not delivered. Not announced. Just there. I found it the way people usually find things that were never meant to be discovered early. By checking something unrelated and noticing a new line that hadn't existed before. A reference number. A file name. A date that didn't match any meeting I'd attended. Behavioral clarification summary. Status. Internal, informational. Informational is what systems call documents that aren't supposed to affect anything. They always do. I opened it slowly, not because I was afraid of what it said, but because I wanted to register what it assumed. The language was polished, professional, calm. That was the danger. Subject demonstrates heightened procedural awareness. Displays resistance to support structures while maintaining surface-level compliance. Communication style is controlled, deliberate, and occasionally oppositional. Oppositional, not incorrect, just framed. There was a paragraph titled Observed Indicators. I hadn't been observed. There was a section titled Contextual Interpretation. I hadn't been interviewed. There was a concluding note. No immediate intervention recommended. Continued documentation advised. Documentation. Again, I checked the metadata. Authored by Consultant ID 417. Reviewed by Coordination Unit. Not signed. Not dated beyond system time. No direct attribution, which meant no one technically owned it. That's how responsibility evaporates. The real problem wasn't what the report said. It was where it had already gone. I checked access logs. 3 views. One from a regional office. One from a municipal services node. One from a medical liaison group I'd never contacted. The file had legs. I sat at my table and read the report again. Not emotionally, structurally. This wasn't an assessment. It was a primer. A document designed to pre-shape interpretation so that future actions, no matter how mild, would be read through a preloaded lens. If I objected later, it would confirm resistance. If I complied, it would confirm managed behavior. It was elegant and dangerous. I drafted my response the same day. Not a complaint, not a rebuttal, a correction of record. 6 pages. Every sentence referenced to statute, protocol, or recorded interaction. No adjectives, no speculation, just fact, sequence, and authority. I attached it to the system under supplemental documentation, subject submitted. That label mattered. Subject submitted documents are not integrated. They sit adjacent, which means they can be ignored, unless someone looks closely. So I made them look. I sent formal notice to 3 offices. Not accusing, not requesting. Notice of material discrepancy in circulating summary document. Potential impact on administrative decision-making. That phrase, potential impact, forces review. Nobody wants to be the one who relied on something flagged in advance. 2 days passed. Nothing. Then, quietly, the report status changed. From informational to archived, superseded pending clarification. Not removed, just buried. That was a partial win. But partial wins are how systems regroup. That night, I received a letter. Physical, printed, no return address. Inside was a single page. No letterhead, just text. You're correct that the summary was premature. You're incorrect in assuming it won't reappear in a revised form. Clarification processes don't erase trajectories, they refine them. No signature. But I knew who hadn't sent it. I didn't sleep much that night. Not from fear, from calculation. They were adjusting their angle. Less about me now, more about the environment around me. Neighbors, service providers, third parties who don't know they're participating. That's how escalation works when direct pressure fails. You stop pushing the door. You change the room it opens into. The next morning, I tested something small. I requested a routine service update, nothing sensitive. The response came back slower than usual. When it did, it included a line that hadn't been there before. Subject to verification of current status. Status, undefined, unnecessary, inserted. The environment was already shifting. I added a new page to the folder. Secondary containment phase. Because once systems stop acting on you and start acting around you, the danger isn't confrontation, it's normalization. And normalization is harder to challenge than force. The changes didn't announce themselves. They never do. They arrived disguised as delays, hesitations, and polite uncertainty, small enough that any single one could be dismissed, but consistent enough to form a pattern. The first was my internet provider. I logged in to pay a routine bill and was redirected to a verification page I'd never seen before. Additional confirmation required. Not identity verification. Not payment validation. Account context confirmation. I clicked through. A form appeared. Sparse. Neutral. Have there been any recent changes to your living situation? Are you currently receiving assistance of any kind? Is anyone helping you manage administrative matters? None of these questions were required to process a payment. I answered precisely, briefly, truthfully. The confirmation went through, but my payment posted as pending review. Pending. That word again. The second change was social. A neighbor I'd spoken to for years stopped me in the stairwell. Nothing dramatic, just a pause where there hadn't been one before. You doing okay? He asked. The tone was careful, not curious, assessed. I'm fine, I said. He nodded, but didn't relax. Good, he replied. Just checking. Checking for what? He didn't say. The third change was institutional. I requested a copy of a document I'd already obtained twice in the past. This time, the clerk asked for an additional form. This is new, I said. She smiled, apologetic, practiced. Yes, but it's standard now. Standard is what systems say when they don't want to explain origins. I filled it out. At the bottom, there was a checkbox already marked. Information may be shared with coordinating bodies for continuity of care. I unmarked it. She noticed. That might slow things down, she said gently. I'm aware, I replied. Her smile thinned. By the end of the week, I had confirmed what I'd suspected. No single authority had acted. Instead, signals had been released. Soft ones, ambiguous ones, enough to trigger caution in every adjacent system without triggering accountability in any one of them. This was containment by diffusion. No walls, no locks, just friction. I mapped it out on paper. Every delay, every added step, every question that didn't belong. Not emotionally, logistically. The pattern was clear. They weren't trying to stop me. They were trying to slow me until I stopped myself. That's how modern restrictions work. If nothing outright denies you, you have nothing to appeal. Then came the letter from my bank. Not a freeze, not an alert, a review. As part of routine oversight, we are conducting an internal review of select accounts to ensure optimal customer protection. Protection. Always protection. They requested a meeting. Optional, but heavily implied. I scheduled it. Refusing would be interpreted as avoidance. The meeting was remote. 2 representatives. One speaking, one observing. They asked about my financial habits, my support network, whether I ever felt overwhelmed managing things alone. I answered carefully. Every answer neutral. Every pause measured. I didn't defend myself. I didn't volunteer. I denied narrative hooks. That unsettled them. The speaker glanced at the observer twice. Finally, she said, "We just want to make sure you're supported." I am, I replied. By existing systems. As designed. That sentence ended the meeting. Afterward, I updated the folder. Tertiary environmental pressure identified. This wasn't escalation yet. This was conditioning. Teaching the environment to hesitate around me. Teaching others to frame me as fragile without evidence. Teaching systems to wait for permission that would never come. The danger was no longer action. It was consensus forming quietly. Once enough people hesitate, the hesitation itself becomes proof. That's when policy follows. I made one decision that night. I stopped reacting. From that moment on, every move would be preemptive, not responsive. Because once the world starts asking whether you're okay, I didn't push back. That's what they expected. A complaint, a letter, a lawyer's name dropped too early. All noise. Instead, I did the opposite. I became perfectly transparent, not emotionally, administratively. I requested records, all of them, formally, calmly, in writing. Every agency that had touched my name in the last 6 months received the same request, tailored only enough to meet their procedures. Please provide all records, notes, internal flags, assessments, and interagency communications associated with my identity, file number, or account profile. including but not limited to risk indicators, care coordination references, and third-party annotations. No accusations, no tone, just scope. The responses didn't arrive all at once. They never do. Some came quickly, clean, minimal, defensive. Others stalled. One office replied asking me to clarify why I wanted the information. I responded with a single sentence: to maintain accurate personal records. That phrase is bulletproof. While they gathered documents, I began the second phase. I started logging my own normality. Not a diary, a ledger. Dates, times, transactions, interactions. Every routine action documented in the same language institutions use. Completed. Confirmed. No irregularities observed. If anyone ever tried to frame my life as unstable, I wanted a counter-archive that spoke their dialect. The first packet arrived from a municipal office. Thin, but not empty. Buried on page 4 was a line that didn't belong. Subject may benefit from enhanced oversight due to cumulative indicators. Indicators. Plural. No list. No source. No date. Just implication. I highlighted it in yellow and wrote one word in the margin. Undefined. The bank sent theirs next. More careful. More sanitized. But there it was again, phrased differently. Account flagged for contextual review following external data correlation. External. Correlation. No consent checkbox could undo what had already been shared. By the third packet, I could see the mechanism clearly. No one was accusing me of anything. They were referencing each other. A loop. Office A hesitated because Office B had flagged something vague. Office B flagged something because Office C had concerns. Office C's concern originated from an unsigned note that cited general patterns. No author, no claim, no responsibility, just circulation. This is how suspicion becomes infrastructure. I assembled everything into a single document. Not a complaint, a reconciliation report. I listed every undefined phrase, every passive construction, every assumption without attribution. Then I did something they hadn't planned for. I sent it back, to all of them. The cover letter was short. Attached is a consolidated review of all references made to my status across your respective systems. Several entries contain non-specific indicators that appear to influence procedural handling. Please advise which office is the originating authority for these indicators so that inaccuracies may be corrected at the source. No threat, just a request for ownership. Silence followed, longer this time. That was the sound of a system trying to decide who was supposed to speak. Because once something is written down and circulated, someone has to stand behind it. And none of them wanted to. A week later, I received the first revision notice. Then another. Then a quiet update to a digital portal. Language softened. Flags downgraded. Indicators became notes. Notes became historical context. Historical context doesn't trigger action. The hesitation began to reverse. Clerks stopped pausing. Forms processed faster. The neighbor nodded normally again. Not because they believed anything new, but because the system no longer whispered around me. I hadn't proven I was fine. I had proven something more dangerous. That no one could prove I wasn't. And that meant they couldn't touch me without leaving fingerprints. That night, I closed the folder. Not because the threat was gone, but because it had changed shape. The system now knew I was watching it watch me. And that knowledge makes institutions very careful. They stopped using offices. That was the shift. No more counters. No more forms. No more portals quietly updating in the background. Instead, they came through people. It started with a phone call from my sister. We weren't close, but we weren't estranged either. Birthdays, holidays, the occasional neutral check-in. That was the shape of it. Her voice was careful, too careful. I ran into someone today, she said. From the council. I didn't interrupt. They just asked how you were doing. There it was. Not what I was doing. Not where I was. How. I told them you were fine. She added quickly. Independent. Organized. Still you. Still you. That phrase landed harder than any letterhead. The next day, my neighbor knocked. The same one who had avoided eye contact months earlier. He held a package that wasn't his. Thought this might have been left by mistake, he said, extending it like a peace offering. We stood there too long for the exchange to feel natural. You doing okay? He asked finally. Not curious. Concerned. Concern is suspicion with a friendly mask. I am, I said. Calm. Neutral. He nodded, relieved, like he'd completed a task. Good. Just good. Then came the invitation. A coffee. From an old friend. Someone I hadn't spoken to in years, but who suddenly remembered how much we used to talk. We sat across from each other in a bright place with too much glass. He stirred his drink without sipping. They're worried about you, he said. Who's they? I asked. He hesitated. You know, people. No one ever knows who people are. They asked me to check in, he continued. Just casually. Make sure you weren't isolated. There it was. Isolation. The word they use when independence makes them nervous. I realized then what transparency couldn't block. Concern laundering. When institutions stop writing notes, they start planting conversations. No records. No requests. Just soft pressure disguised as care. If I reacted defensively, it would confirm their fears. If I withdrew, it would validate the narrative. So I did something harder. I stayed open. I answered every question without emotion. Yes, I socialize. Yes, I manage my finances. Yes, I plan ahead. No complaints. No jokes. No irritation. I made myself boringly functional. The kind of person no one can advocate for because there's nothing to fix. But they kept coming. A distant cousin. A former colleague. Even my doctor, during a routine appointment. Any changes at home? Anyone helping you lately? Have you felt overwhelmed? Each question framed like support. Each answer recorded nowhere, except memory. That's when I understood the real test. They weren't looking for instability. They were looking for permission. A crack. A confession they could interpret generously on my behalf. All it would take was one sentence like, sometimes it's a lot to handle. And the system would lean in. Not with handcuffs, with help. So I chose precision. I experience normal stress, I said. I respond appropriately. I have adequate support when I choose to use it. Language matters, especially when it can be repeated without context. Eventually, the visits slowed. Not because concern disappeared, but because concern couldn't anchor itself. There was no emotional leverage to grab onto. No savior role to play. But the silence afterward was different. Not relieved, observant, like something had learned it couldn't move me directly. So it would try something else. Something quieter. Something procedural. That night, I checked my mail. Inside was a single envelope. Unmarked. No letterhead. Just a notice of scheduled review. Not mandatory. Not optional. Just scheduled. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Because this time, they weren't pretending anymore. They were stepping back into the system. And systems make mistakes. The review was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Not a hearing. Not an interrogation. A review. The kind of word that sounds harmless until you realize it only exists when something has already been questioned. I arrived early. That mattered. People who arrive early aren't confused. They aren't disorganized. They aren't being carried by the process. They're waiting for it. The room was smaller than I expected. No flags. No slogans. Just a table, 3 chairs, and a laptop already open. 2 people were there when I walked in. Not specialists. Not doctors. Administrators. That told me everything. This wasn't about my mental state. It was about risk management. They smiled. Practiced. Neutral. Thank you for coming, one of them said. As you know, this is just a routine review. Routine again. I sat down and placed a thin folder on the table. Not thick. Not dramatic. Enough to be noticed. They asked their questions carefully. How I was managing. Whether I felt supported. If I had considered accepting assistance. I answered calmly. Yes. No. When appropriate. Each response precise. Complete. Closed. No openings. Then one of them leaned forward. We've received concerns. There it was. Concerns. No source. No documentation. Just air. I understand, I said. I've prepared something that might help clarify. I slid the folder forward. Inside were copies, time-stamped emails, service confirmations, medical summaries, financial records, independent assessments I had requested myself. Not defensive, proactive. They flipped through the pages more slowly than they meant to. This wasn't what they expected. People who need oversight don't prepare evidence. They don't document the system back. One of them cleared her throat. This is quite thorough. I keep records, I said. Not proudly. Factually. Silence settled in the room. Not awkward. Calculating. Because now they had a problem. If they escalated, they'd have to justify it against clear documentation. If they retreated, they'd have to explain why concerns suddenly vanished. Either choice created paperwork, and paperwork creates accountability. Finally, the laptop closed. We don't see grounds to proceed further at this time. At this time, I nodded. That was enough. When I stood to leave, the other administrator spoke. If anything changes, please don't hesitate to reach out. I met her eyes. If something changes, I said, I'll document it. She didn't smile. Outside, the air felt lighter, not because I'd won, but because I understood the game now. They weren't villains. They weren't heroes. They were a system trained to act only when unchecked. And systems fear one thing above all else. People who stay calm, who stay present, who keep records. Nothing dramatic happened afterward. No apology. No follow-up. Just quiet. The kind that comes when something decides you're too expensive to pursue. And that's the truth they don't advertise. You don't escape pressure by shouting. You don't defeat it by panicking.